Two-thirds of immigrants, including some with permanent residency, were not paying their monthly minimum payments on an outstanding $150 million worth of tax-funded immigration loans.
Alberta's education minister is pushing back against claims that the province's ban on sexually graphic materials constitutes a, quote, book ban.
U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order recognizing only two genders now means Canadians can no longer mark their gender as X on new or renewed Nexus travel cards. Hello Canada, it's Wednesday, August 6th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Zoltan.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Two-thirds of immigrants, including permanent residents, were not making minimum monthly payments on an outstanding $150 million in taxpayer-funded immigration loans. These loans carry zero interest and terms most Canadians could only dream of. According to access to information records obtained by True North, federal officials reported that only 36% of recipients of the immigration loans program were making minimum monthly payments as of March 31st, 2023, down sharply from before the COVID pandemic. Immigration officials wrote, quote, before the pandemic, 59% of clients with outstanding loans were making required minimum monthly payments towards their loans compared to 36% at March 31st, 2023. This translates to a total loan payment decrease from $20 million in 2021-2022 to $17 million in 2022-2023. That means 64% of immigration loan holders are possibly delinquent on their repayments. It is unclear how many of those failing to make minimum monthly payments have entered deferred repayment or defaulted entirely on their loans. Attempts by True North to receive further clarification from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada went unanswered. By comparison, the average delinquency rate for Canadian consumers with a non-mortgage debt sits at around 1.60%, according to Equifax data for Q1 2025. Even among young adults aged 26 to 35, one of the riskiest borrowing groups, delinquency averages only 2.37%. The documents also revealed that outstanding immigrant debt owed to Canadian taxpayers ballooned to over $150 million, nearly double the $80 million owed the year prior. So when I was looking over these documents, I thought to myself that any bank that operated this way would have immediately been out of business, because the amount of consumers of these loans who are not making the minimum monthly payment, and I have to elaborate a little bit here because to understand what type of loan this is. So it's a zero interest loan, first of all. And when you actually look at the terms of the repayment schemes that these loans are handed out, they're up to 8 years. So over, I think, $4,000 or $5,000, you get up to 8 years to pay back. Let's say you get a $5,000 loan at 0% interest rate. That's a monthly payment of about $50. So are we to believe that new immigrants who take these loans, come to Canada, have the means to live here, are not able to make a $50 monthly payment on a $5,000 loan over 8 years? It's just outrageous. And as the article points out, these are terms that most Canadians could only dream of. Like, they're literally unheard of. And for the government to operate a program that most banks would shut down over, like if every bank in the world operated on these types of margins, there would be a global financial crisis. So I don't understand how it's acceptable for a government to operate this way, whereas private businesses and banks operate at such a lower percentage of people actually being potentially delinquent on loans. Even like 2% delinquency rates on credit card loans is pretty high for a bank, and they start to get worried when consumers are not able to pay at that level. But when you have over 60%, two-thirds, a majority of your clients not making minimum monthly payments, I don't think you can even call that a loan, because the chances of actually recouping your money are slim to none. But Alex, why are so many immigrants so behind on these loans? granted to them by taxpayers to fund their immigration process in Canada?
Well, Cosmin, it's a bit of a difficult question to answer because, as with any loan delinquency, the reason that a person is unable to pay a loan is pretty much as unique as the borrower. What I can tell you from my own experience in finance is that one of the reasons I think that people are less likely to prioritize paying back these loans is it's a little known fact in Canada that typically speaking, government loans do not appear on credit bureaus. It's not exactly clear why that is. They appear, but they don't report. So the credit bureau agencies, the two principal ones in Canada being Equifax and TransUnion, will report student loans. But if you pay your student loans every single month, without error, it doesn't do anything for your credit score. We've learned this just through the law of deduction and looking over credit reports in the bank. So many borrowers, will come in for their first mortgage, and the only lending facility that they've ever had is a student loan. And they will have a 0 credit score. So there's very, very little incentive for these individuals to pay off these loans judiciously, you could say. Also, it's worth mentioning that typically, I would assume most asylum seekers, given that they're new to the country, don't have a credit score. So you have a 0 credit score, and if you fail to pay back these loans, your credit score cannot go negative. So putting that all into perspective, I assume that many of these people, first of all, don't have much incentive to pay back the loans quickly. And secondly, I don't know if they've been provided much guidance on how to pay back the loans. And thirdly, also relevant to this story, is the fact that Immigration Canada will not remove you from the country if you fail to pay back these loans. So once you account for all of those different factors, it becomes clear why many new immigrants, or well, in this case, asylum seekers, are just not prioritizing paying back these loans. They're likely prioritizing, getting their feet on the ground, or perhaps they've left the country altogether and they have no intention of paying them back at all. Alberta Education Minister Demetrius Nicolaitis is pushing back against what he calls misleading claims from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association that the province's ban on sexually graphic materials in school libraries constitutes a, quote, book ban. Nicolaitis wrote in a Sunday post on X, quote, "This op-ed is flagrantly incorrect. This is not a book ban. The government does not have the ability or desire to ban books. Non-sexual content on topics like the human body and puberty is not restricted, contrary to the incorrect reporting from the media." Nicolaitis' remarks came in response to a July 29th op-ed posted in the Edmonton Journal, co-authored by CCLA Executive Director Howard Sapers and Fundamental Freedoms Director Anais Bossiers-McNichol, which argued that the government's new rules amount to censorship. The op-ed stated, quote, "Alberta's Minister of Education and Childcare recently issued an order banning some books from all school libraries in the province. This means that from September onwards, classics such as George Orwell's 1984 and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale will be banned from all school libraries for all students aged 6 to 18. The CCLA leaders further misleadingly claimed the policy would also restrict access to sexual health resources and coming-of-age stories such as The Catcher in the Rye and The Perks of Being a Wallflower. They wrote, quote, "The minister says these new criteria do not amount to banning books and that this order is not censorship. We disagree on both counts." Nicolaitis has directly challenged that the characterization, saying the government's order only targets graphic sexual content inappropriate for children. He has also repeatedly stated and reiterated on Sunday that his ministry could not ban specific books even if he wanted to. So, Cosmin, could you clarify for me, I'm not in Alberta. Do you know what kind of books this legislation actually blocks?
Yeah, so several books were actually named when they first announced this policy. Think books like Genderqueer, which is a so-called graphic novel that features actual depictions of graphic sex acts. And that's not literature. That's just straight up pornography. And it's been sitting on school shelves, sometimes available to kids as young as 5 years old. And this legislation simply states that that type of material is not allowed in schools, period. So when the media publishes these op-eds crying about so-called book bans, they're leaving out the reality that parents are actually the ones demanding this, because it was parents that prompted the Alberta government to craft this legislation, not bureaucrats. There was a whole survey that involved students, involved parents, and educators as well. But you have activists and some activist librarians particularly who are speaking out against this. And the province actually asked the general public, and families overwhelmingly said they don't want their kids exposed to books like Genderqueer. There's another book also called Flamer, and it includes graphic depictions of ejaculation. There's books that have instances of pedophilia in it. So this policy is about protecting children, period, and not silencing ideas. It's about promoting the educational environment and having a healthy space where students can discuss topics like sexuality, sex, and positive relationships without being exposed to graphic depictions that would be unacceptable in any other circumstance. And people don't realize this, that some of the books that are affected by this so-called ban, by this policy that removes graphic sexual depictions from libraries, you couldn't go to a municipal council meeting or read them out loud in parliament. So why, if we can't talk about these things or read word for word the depictions in a public setting where adults are present, why do we think, or rather, why do these activists think that it should be acceptable for children to be exposed to this? One argument that this op-ed and the writers make is they try to claim that it's about queer representation, but that's not the case. Alberta's not banning identity. It's not saying, oh, you're not allowed to have queer representation in libraries. That would require, reversing things like Pride Month, getting rid of pride flags, which is simply absurd, and it's not happening. Like you just have to look at what's going on in Alberta to realize that that's not happening. All schools have queer representation today. It's banning explicit material, explicit sexual material. So under this policy, you can have books that include, LGBT people and discusses their lives and relationships without zooming in on depictions of naked minors, as these books do outside of a biology class. It's the setting isn't the same. So I think people need to stop pretending it's all or nothing, that there's nuance to this, and to claim that getting rid of this practice and these materials from school libraries is the beginning of some dystopian nightmare is simply not true. And it's just an exaggeration used for an effect by activists who I think just want this to keep going. But this is simply just about setting standards and having public libraries and bookstores be a place where children can educate themselves rather than be exposed to graphic sexual content. Canadians can no longer mark their gender as the letter X on new or renewed Nexus travel cards following a change tied to an executive order by U.S. President Donald Trump that restricts federal recognition to only two genders, male and female. The Canada Border Services Agency confirmed the policy update applies to all Nexus applicants, even if they hold a Canadian passport with an X designation. Current Nexus cards issued with an X remain valid. However, all future applications must align with U.S. gender identification rules, selecting either male or female designation. CBSA spokesperson Rebecca Purdy in a statement said, quote, "New applicants are able to apply using a passport with the X gender identifier. However, they will be required to select male or female for the purposes of their Nexus membership. The Nexus program is jointly administered by the CBSA and U.S. Customs and Border Protection, allowing pre-approved low-risk travelers to fast-track their travel between Canada and the United States at certain border crossings. Nexus card holders can use exclusive lanes at border crossings, which include facial verification machines that hasten the entry process. The CBSA said approximately 550 Nexus applications have been submitted using the X gender marker between January 2022 and March 2025. The U.S. will continue to accept Canadian passports with the X marker for general travel. The bilateral nature of the Nexus program means eligibility criteria must satisfy the requirements of both governments. Alex, we were talking about common sense earlier. What is your take on Trump's policy of officially recognizing there being only two genders, and how is this going to affect, travel for Canadians?
I think that the impact to travel on Canadians is going to be fairly minimal, and at least that's been the case so far. So according to Reuters, there have been no confirmed cases of Canadians being denied entry to the United States because their passport listed an X gender marker, or because their gender identity did not match their assigned sex at birth. Global Affairs Canada has also confirmed that they have received no reports of entry denials on that basis. Travel warnings issued by Canada indicate scrutiny of electronic devices and documentation, and they mention that travelers should comply with U.S. questioning, but denial related to gender marker mismatch has not been documented in publicly available reports, according to Canadian travelers, Reuters, and Global Affairs Canada. I will also add that this does seem, in my opinion, like very much a common sense decision. When you book a flight, it requires you to pick a specific gender. It does not give you the option to pick a non-binary option, depending on which airline you're flying with. But from my experience, I have only seen the male and female options. And from my understanding, one of the reasons for that policy is that in the extremely unlikely event that there was a plane crash, knowing the gender of passengers helps them to identify those passengers post-mortem. So it's really quite important for people to know what gender you are if you're flying on a plane or if you're entering from another country. It also helps to identify individuals who may have previous criminal convictions or maybe a registered offender, particularly violent sex offenders. And so I can see why the policy decision was made to ban X identifiers on passports for incoming Canadians. But again, according to all of the evidence that we have, the impact to Canadian travelers has been less than minimal. It's been virtually nothing at all.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.